Good afternoon, everybody. My name is McKenna Sellers. I'm the Executive Director for Montana Renewable Energy Association. And I'm very glad that you all are here joining us today for our November Exploring Energy series. So just a few housekeeping items. Please keep yourself muted during the presentation just to avoid background noise while we're eating our lunches and doing our thing. There will be opportunity for discussion at key points during the presentation. We'd love to have you participate during those times. The other opportunity for you is you can submit Q&A questions directly through the chat. Kate and I will be sort of monitoring that throughout the presentation, and we'll save those questions for discussion at the end. The presentation will be about 30 minutes long, so we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and general discussion. And in the case that we are not able to get to your question, I encourage you to submit your question directly and email us at info@montanarenewables.org. and we'll make sure to get you an answer. And also please know that this presentation is being recorded. You can look at some of our past Exploring Energy series presentations on the MREA YouTube channel, which I have just dropped in the chat for you all. A little about MREA for folks who may not know us. MREA is a nonprofit 501c3 membership-based organization, and our mission is to expand and foster the growth of renewable energy for all Montanans through education, through events like this, the Exploring Energy series, through advocacy at the Public Service Commission and the state legislature, and through industry engagement with installers, energy efficiency contractors, and with household members as well. So our presentation today is how the Inflation Reduction Act impacts labor. And we are joined by a guest speaker from the BlueGreen Alliance. Her name is Kate French. The BlueGreen Alliance is an organization that unites environmental groups and labor unions toward clean jobs, clean infrastructure, and fair trade. So we're so excited to have Kate French joining us. I'll give you her bio here now. Kate French is the Rocky Mountain Field Organizer with BlueGreen Alliance. As a lifelong Westerner, she has focused her work on creating a more resilient future for Montana's and the West's diverse communities and landscapes. She spent 9 years as a board member and then researcher for Northern Plains Resource Council, a rural Montana grassroots organization. During this time, she forged new partnerships between environmentalists, ranchers, power plant workers, and unions to successfully advocate for comprehensive closure of the coal ash pond complex in Colstrip, Montana. She then spent 3 years as a regional organizer with the Western Organization of Resource Councils to advance just transition and clean energy policies at the national level. Her research and reports on the economic impacts and job creation potential of complete coal ash pond closure and coal mine remediation have been widely cited and utilized by coalfield communities around the country. Her other work on rural community resilience, local policymaking, community ag practices, and rural electric co-ops have allowed her to partner and work alongside many diverse stakeholders all across the West. Kate earned her Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Colorado and her Master's of Public Administration from Montana State University, and she lives in Livingston, Montana. So Kate, welcome. We are so excited to have you. My personal addition to Kate's bio is that she's an amazing person, and I'm very happy to call her a friend. So Kate, I will pass the mic to you. I'll stop sharing and let you jump right into your presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the bio. I forgot my bio is so long. Usually I'm like, I live in Livingston. That's about all I needs to know. But yeah, McKenna, how long do you think I should leave or do the presenting for and then the Q&A? Did you say half hour for the presentation? Okay, cool. Great. Yeah, and I definitely have some questions prepared for you all because I'm really curious about all the folks that are in attendance today as well. And yeah, so I'll just start sharing my screen here. Let's see, screen 2. All right, and I'll make sure that slide shows up. All right, can you guys see that? Okay, wonderful. All right. Like McKenna said, I'm with the BlueGreen Alliance. I'll The structure of my talk today is that, I'd love to introduce myself a little bit more, but mostly talk about like, what is BGA, and then what is my role as a regional field organizer with BlueGreen Alliance. I'd like to talk a little bit about like what we're doing in Montana, because we're pretty new here. And then really the bulk of the presentation though is going to be on the federal funding opportunities that have come through with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, and specifically provisions and the programs that we're most excited about at BlueGreen Alliance. And then, like I said, I'm gonna have some questions for all you all too. So this is my contact information. I'll be sharing these slides with everybody, but please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to connect you with other people in our organization, or if I can be of assistance, or connect you with other folks that I work with in the state, of course. Broadly, BlueGreen Alliance is a coalition organization. We were started actually by the Sierra Club and the Steelworkers. So the United Steelworkers, and so I'm actually a member of the Steelworkers Union, and they were kind of informally collaborating at the national level, especially, and because there were so many conflicts that felt like they could be avoided if just folks got in the room beforehand and just started talking about what they have in common. So that informal collaboration that really started in the late 90s was formalized in 2006 when BlueGreen Alliance was established and incorporated as a 501c3 and C4. So we really believe that we can create good jobs and a clean environment, and that we do not have to choose between these, right? These are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, the clean energy economy is going to be better off if we also make sure that these are high quality jobs that people want to call careers and will be careers for them. So that's really the basis of a lot of our work. Now we have a national coalition, our national table. I'll show you here. These are all of our partners who sit on who are members of BlueGreen Alliance. We also have our state tables. And so we have state tables in California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Wisconsin, Minnesota. We have a really big Midwest focus actually, because we have an office there. And yeah, as you'll see, we don't have a table in Montana. So that's why my position is kind of interesting. As a regional field organizer, I'm here to engage some of our labor and environmental partners to advocate for really good policies that are going to advance our mutual interests together. So it's really a federal policy focus, whether it's advocating for federal legislation or making sure those laws are then implemented really well. So that's going to be the bulk of my talk today. Also, I just want to note in here in this list of 14 organizations, the United Auto Workers, that's our newest addition, which is really, really exciting. We've had a really big emphasis on EV manufacturing and truck manufacturing, electric vehicle truck manufacturing, that kind of thing, medium and heavy duty trucks as well. So it's just great that they've joined more recently. So I will be sharing, these are all links. I will be sharing these. I think these are really interesting documents that explain like our coalition's shared priorities, but also the IRA and Bill Resource Center is a wonderful resource where you can go access all sorts of interesting information and necessary information for the implementation of these two laws. I really recommend that you check this out. I think it's one of the more comprehensive and much easier to use resource guides that's out there. Additionally, it includes a lot of information about the labor, equity, and worker provisions that we really focus on at BGA. Or I was going to say coal community transition issues that we focus on at BGA, and how those are incorporated throughout these two laws. So that's definitely worth checking out. I'll be rushing by a lot of that or covering a lot of that today, but it'll be pretty quick. So I really recommend you check out these resources and share them with your networks.
I sort of covered this, but BGA in Montana, really my goal is to engage labor and environmentalists or enviros just to make sure that federal investments create good jobs and benefits for union workers while protecting our environment and while really advancing the fight against climate change. So I think that there's a lot that these two entities can learn from each other. There's, which I think seems kind of patently obvious, but sometimes it feels like there's a lot of barriers to communication from the history of these organizations kind of clashing at certain times. And what I hope to do is foster more open communication between these two sets of groups, because there's a lot more in common that they each have than I think many people understand. So we'll just keep kind of going. All right, one thing to really point out about union labor when it comes to clean energy is that there are many, many more benefits than are typically acknowledged. Obviously, there are benefits for workers. If we have union labor and provisions that help advance the cause of workers and their needs in clean energy legislation, that's going to result in more sustainable careers with more security. And it also means that for a lot of workers, they get to stay in their local communities. That's especially important if they're in a transitioning coal community, right? Where you have a coal mine or a coal-fired power plant that is slated for retirement. So this is a really important thing that we try to keep our eyes on. But there are also benefits for developers. There are many studies out there that show that your project quality is higher when you hire union labor. Typically, it's going to come in under budget, it's going to be on time, and it's going to be well built. So you're going to have less breaking down, fewer repairs to make. And there's also the big benefit of less worker turnover. Again, these are sustainable, meaningful careers for folks. They don't really want to leave these careers once they're established. And for good reason. And then, of course, there are benefits for the climate. You have more people in more communities all around the state or all around the country who feel personally invested in creating these clean energy developments and these clean energy solutions, maybe manufacturing. And it brings more brain power in. So you're going to be generating more innovation, which is a really exciting thing to see on the ground, honestly. So jumping into the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's so many programs within both of these laws. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was passed in 2021 in November, so we're about at the year mark of its passage. I've listed here some of the programs that I actually adapted this presentation from one that I gave to all the IBEW business managers in Montana. So I was like, well, this is probably a lot of the same programs that are interest at MREA. So I included in there the grid upgrades and the transmission expansion, the electric vehicle funding here. And there's a lot of funding for new energy generation and manufacturing facilities. There's a lot to do with hydrogen, other cutting edge clean energy generation. But really, this is where we see the massive investments in transportation and transmission and grid infrastructure. And so that's really going to be a massive amount of work for us and a special amount of work in Montana. Then as we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, the emphasis there is really there's these clean energy tax credits, which some of them we're very, very familiar with, but they've been expanded in a way and extended in really interesting ways that I'll explain in a minute. There's also lots of incentives for domestic materials and domestic manufacturing, manufacturing for clean energy components, and industrial emission reductions. So these two things together, you can see there's some overlap, but they kind of have their own specializations in a way. The thing that did kind of get lost in all of this was really our MUSH, what we call our municipal university schools and hospitals funding. Hopefully they'll be taking advantage of the tax credits in here, but that was one of our big priorities that didn't get included. Broadly, there's a lot of labor equity and coal community provisions baked into these laws that I'll be referencing, but just for quick reference here. First of all, we have the Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage standard. And so that's a floor for the wages that can be paid for any trade or anyone working on a particular job. We do say it's a floor. You can always go up from here, but it's really to ensure that everybody working on a project has a family sustaining wage that is commensurate with other workers in this field. Also, we have domestic content. It's Buy America, Build America, Build America, Buy America. Anyway, this is now applied to most all of the provisions in bill and IRA, but it's 100% US steel and iron and 40% of the cost of the components. So that was expanded. Registered apprenticeship utilization. And so this is a requirement that a certain number of the job hours are completed by apprentices who are part of a USDA, the Department of Labor Registered Apprenticeship Program, or something that's associated through the state registration of apprenticeship programs. So this is where we have the workforce development piece of our clean energy tax credits, for instance, to make sure that we are building the workforce we need for the future. Justice 40, this is the law where, or the provision where 40% of these investments do need to go to disadvantaged communities. And so these are communities that are communities of color, low income communities that have generally been excluded from a lot of these types of investments. And then special provisions for energy transition communities. And those are generally recognized as coal communities at the moment. And that's work that the interagency working group at the federal level has been working to define. So getting into the weeds a little bit here, we have the ITC and the PTC, so the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. And I'm sure y'all are familiar with most of these. The way that they've been expanded though, well, they've been extended, so that's wonderful. The ITC though is now, if you have a base rate of 6%, okay, but it jumps up to 30% if you meet the labor standards. And those two are the prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship utilization rates. And those actually, the registered apprenticeship utilization rates, I'll just say apprentices or apprentice rates, that does ramp up over time. So it starts at 10%, but then it ramps up. That only applies once you have more than 4 workers on a project. But then you get your 30% tax credit for the ITC. It starts with solar, onshore and offshore wind, geothermal, storage, which is great, microgrid controllers. After that, it goes to a tech neutral approach, which is basically nothing that's a carbon emitting approach after that. So that's kind of where you could have anything else jump into the mix. We have the production tax credit, and that also has a base rate of 0.5 cents per kilowatt hour as a base, or 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour once you meet those labor standards. Again, it applies to onshore wind, solar, geothermal, and storage, tech neutral after 2025. The phase down for all of these ends, or it starts to end when it's either 2032. It's not just a cliff, but it starts to phase out. Or if we reach 25% of emissions in 2022, so today's emissions, but 25% of them, likely we'll probably get to 2032 before that happens, but one can always hope. Anyway, in addition to those base credits and then the credits that you get with the labor standards, on top of those, there's a domestic content bonus, so 10% additional tax credit on top of that. If it's located within a coal community, as defined by the IWG, that's 10% extra. If you're in a low income community, that's, and it's, let's see, a 5 megawatt system, it's 10% or 20% if it's on a low income affordable housing project of some sort. And then finally, there's direct pay for tax exempt entities. So this includes states, local governments, tribal entities, tribal governments, and rural electric co-ops. So that's a really exciting and very, very meaningful provision in here. Let's move on. Pardon my ums. There's also, this isn't as huge a deal for Montana, I'll be frank, but I think it could be really exciting if we had folks who wanted to start investing more in the manufacturing side of things. But the IRA invests tons of money and resources into making sure that we are building the domestic supply chain, the cleanest and most reliable domestic supply chain for all of this clean energy build out. And so we're doing that through investing into, clean energy technologies, but also into emission reduction investments, emission reduction technologies on manufacturing facilities. Because when it comes down to it, there are a lot of very hard to decarbonize industries, cement, aluminum, and steel in particular, and recognizing that these aren't going to be phased out anytime soon. It's really, really critical that we make sure that US manufacturers have access to these cutting edge technologies. So really getting those out of just the research and development stage and really implementing them is key. And hopefully all these investments will go there. The provisions for energy transition communities and workers, there's really interesting loans to repurpose existing energy infrastructure. So that's land, or could be a coal mine that has been reclaimed, or any piece of a power plant that's been retired. So there's loans in there to repurpose that infrastructure. We also have the energy community credits for clean energy and manufacturing. So if you're locating your facility in a clean energy or in an energy impacted community, you're going to have, there's much more money that's slated for those communities. There was a really exciting permanent extension of the black lung excise tax. And so that helps to pay for the very expensive and necessary care for coal miners who suffer from black lung. The two things that we really didn't get in the IRA, to be perfectly frank, were direct funding supports for dislocated workers, and this would be power plant workers at coal facilities or coal miners, and additional funding for the Economic Development Agency. So those are two things that we hope we will still be working on in future legislation. Some other really notable provisions in here, $10 billion for rural renewable energy investments via the USDA. And so that's money for co-ops to install renewable energy projects to displace fossil fuel energy that they're sourcing right now. So that's a very exciting program. It'll be really great to see how that pans out. It also pairs really nicely with the direct pay provisions that I was mentioning before. The other piece of, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole that I was just realizing I wanted to talk about with the direct pay, if that's okay. We have $40 billion of loan authority through the LPO, the Loan Program Office at the federal level. And so this is for innovative clean energy projects, but really solar energy storage, transmission, and wind energy. And then finally, we have the $27 billion in greenhouse gas reduction, or the Green Bank. And then there's 3 pots of money underneath that. Let's see here. One thing to really point out is like, who's getting the benefit of this money? And so really, here we go on the left side on figure 1, it's the energy supply side is getting a lot of this funding. And the things I really didn't cover in here are all the incentives for consumers or households to be buying energy efficiency appliances or retrofits for their homes or a heat pump. All of those are going to be really, really important and are a huge and exciting piece of the IRA. I'm just not focusing on it today because there's less of a worker component in those. I mean, obviously workers are going to be installing them, but those were never really a huge focus of our advocacy efforts. And so I'm just trying to bring to light some of the things where we've had more of a hand in it and we will be more engaged in how these are being implemented at the local level. But anyway, as you can see, tons of focus here on the energy supply side of things. So that is your solar, your geothermal, wind energy generation stuff. On the other side, I think this is the best breakdown I've seen so far, is that the majority of this money is going to businesses via tax credits. So you heard me say there's a lot of tax credits for manufacturers, for developers. And so you can see that's really broken down in this chart here. When we get to the bill Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, I would say that that big red piece would be states, and then, maybe a quarter of it is local governments. So that's a much more of being administered through states, and where a lot of our energy has gone in the implementation work is making sure that really strong labor standards are upheld at every stage of that allocation process. So really quickly, I'll just cover some of the work that we're doing on transmission and grid, because right now there's a massive clean energy queue. A lot of clean energy developments that exist now cannot get onto the grid and cannot start being deployed to, to the population. And that is really due to permitting concerns and that we cannot expand our grid enough. And the projections are, in order to accommodate all these new and diverse energy sources that are coming onto the grid as we're electrifying everything, right? And as we're moving towards a greater, more compatible grid for all of these diverse sources, that we need to expand transmission capacity by 2 to 3 times its current capacity. Add on top of that, like a lot of the existing infrastructure is like 75 years old and it's breaking down and starting wildfires. So making sure that we're making the necessary repairs on the grid and future-proofing it for this additional energy load and diversification is going to be really, really critical. And as you guys all probably know, we don't have a regional transmission organization in the West to help facilitate that regional sharing and coordination of resources. So that's going to be really critical. There's a lot of state interest. Colorado and Nevada have recently passed laws saying that they are going to join a Western RTO. My work here in Montana, I hope, will be to engage other players and stakeholders in that process to make sure that this is designed in a way that we really make best use of all our renewable resources here and also create really good jobs and ensure that local communities have a spot at the table as we're making those decisions. So let's see. We have grid hardening, which is the money that's coming out now, but over the next year, there's going to be more money that's going into transmission. And so that's sending energy across a larger state or a larger region and sharing our wind resources, with Washington or Portland. Let's see here. So I think I want to just end at the half hour there. And I could go back through more of that. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going over too much of my time here. But I do have some questions for you guys, if that helps. And I'm very happy to answer any of the questions that have come through the chat too. McKenna, do you think we should open it up to how you want to?
Yeah, let's start with questions about Kate's presentation, and then if time permits, we can get into some of these discussion questions. So there were a few that came through the chat, Kate. One one is from Dean Littlepage. He asked, it's got a comment about the MUSH benefits coming out of the IRA, and he was asking for clarification if you're speaking of the tax rebate under consideration for tax exempt institutions that was dropped. So, and Dean, if you're still on, if you'd like to clarify the question, I think we could get some good discussion going.
Oh. Well,
there we go.
not-
Are you there, Dean?
There, I'm unmuted.
Great.
Yeah, that's basically the question. I know before, well before the IRA was being negotiated, that was part of the discussion, that there'd be a tax credit for tax exempt institutions instead of tax rebate, which of course doesn't help tax exempt organizations.
Yeah, there was a lot of direct funding that's necessary. A lot, in many instances, yeah, a tax rebate isn't exactly very helpful for tax exempt entities, or entities where it's like, well, you're not a developer, where are you going to, how big is your tax liability anyway? There were also just, there were funds in the form of just grants that were going to be made available. These two bills were originally paired together as like the Build Back Better for America, plan, or the American Jobs Plan, like way back in March 2021. So yeah, it did get negotiated out. So I mean, I don't want to overstate how much we lost, or anything like that, because this is a monumental and historic investment in climate. There's been nothing like it, in climate advocacy history, really. And I'm in this movement and I'm still learning so much more about what is coming out. Every time I read about like the $40 billion in the loan program office that's coming out, I'm like, holy moly, that's like way more money than I thought possible. So that's why I think it's going to be a lot of, it's a kind of exciting time. There's a lot of, it's like an embarrassment of riches, but it's also like, we really have to make sure that we're informing each other about new opportunities as these NOFOs or notice of funding opportunities are announced. So yeah, you're right. They're like, a lot of the buildings and the public buildings, they kind of lose out, but I'm hoping through the Green Bank programs and through the Loan Program Office, especially, that those and the fact that a lot of local governments and state governments can get direct pay for a lot of the clean energy tax credits, like that, we'll be able to like attack that from different angles as we go.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, I was just thinking of it in terms of schools and churches, which have, been a lot of churches, I think, have considered solar, but it doesn't really pencil out without the credit actually becoming a rebate.
Yeah. I think, and the domestic, this is the thing I was going to say about, the direct pay for tax exempt entities. They do have to meet the domestic content standard that I had mentioned. So yeah. So that will be, it's going to be, important for us to like really ramp up the manufacturing side of that, really, commensurate with the need there. So
yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Kate, would you be willing to go back to your pie chart slide?
Sure. This also wasn't from me. It was just a great one that I found, or BGA did not produce this slide, but I was like, this is the best explanation of who's getting the money that I've seen in a very easy to see visual format. So
definitely. Yeah. So there's a question in the chat as we're taking some of this federal funding and thinking about how it can apply to our state, our investor-owned utilities, our rural electric co-ops. There's a question in the chat just about like, so what are the incentives for utilities and co-ops directly? And we know that there's tax credits, you had mentioned also just grid upgrades, $7 billion in grid upgrades. And I don't know how that will be allocated from state to state, or what the allocation process will roll out and how that will look. But curious if you can speak to some of that directly as far as how it'll apply to Montana.
Oh, sure. So let me talk first about the grid upgrades. Was that it? Did you say the 7 billion for grid upgrades? Yeah, so that is a national number, and it is going to be allocated year by year. That is formula funding that's going to the states. And actually that was going to be, so the first pot of money is the grid hardening, and that's just going directly to the states. It's a very low bar of what they need to do to actually apply for this money. The states, they're then going to probably sub-grant that out to utilities and to other entities like a co-op, right? A lot of the grid hardening is to reduce wildfire risk and to proof again, to protect against grid failures of sorts. So some of the state energy offices, that's who's really handling this money, this formula funding. They are looking at microgrids as being one of the ways to enhance resiliency. And some of the others are kind of doing some, they're just buying new equipment with it. And I think that there's a few different ways to approach this. I think that it's also good for the state energy offices to, be aware that they are probably aware, but that there's a lot more funding coming that's competitive funding that they can go for. And so by first using this initial pot of funding to address the most egregious, biggest needs that are really on the grid now, they can start to apply for the more competitive funding that's going to come down later. And so that's going to be a smart grid, the smart grid program, and also transmission facilitation program. So I can't remember the Montana amounts for the grid hardening. And I apologize. I feel like it's at least a couple $2 million a year. But the Montana Energy Office is actually going to be, they were going to have a hearing in September, and then all of the state energy offices put that off by a couple months. So we're just waiting for that to be rescheduled. And it would be great to have folks go to the hearings there and just talk about any needs that folks have for grid hardening, and if there's interest in microgrids, stuff like that. So the other piece about the rural electric co-ops, so this is going to be really, really transformative. It's associated with replacing fossil fuel generation as part of their portfolio with renewable energy or clean energy or energy efficiency projects, right? And so that's actually, it's a 3-to-1 debt forgiveness because it's available for any entity that has debt with the rural utility service. That's most co-ops out there, right? And it's some munis in rural areas as well. And so then that debt that they still are paying off, because coal doesn't really make a lot of financial sense, unfortunately. So they're still paying off those massive capital expenditures, right? And that debt can actually be forgiven if they meet certain criteria and are replacing that generation with clean energy options. That's the rules for that, though, are still being written. There's an RFI comment period right now at the federal level that the USDA has open. It closes on November 28th. After that, it's a program. It's not administered through the state, but it is actually all the co-ops need to come up with their own plan and apply for this funding, right? Or for this debt forgiveness, essentially. It's going to be really incumbent on the members of the co-op to be communicating this opportunity to their to the co-op board, and also come up with here's some ideas for how we can be spending this money, and these are the stipulations that we should put on this funding. And so one thing that we at BGA are always recommending is that we look at a lot of the standards, which are groundbreaking here in terms of labor standards, prevailing wage, registered apprenticeship programs, but also to see that as the floor and that you can go above and beyond to create really good jobs for locals. And that can be a first in line hiring preference for any displaced workers or local workers. It can also be establishing a PLA or a project labor agreement on any clean energy project. And going through the co-ops to do that is a really great and easy way to do it, because they already really contract a lot of their work out to union workers and to the labor unions. So that's a really great way to ensure you're like creating great jobs in rural areas, is to make sure the co-ops are building it, especially when it comes to Montana, where they have those collective bargaining agreements already established with like the IBEW. And then the PLA can be, that's a great concept I wanted to bring up at some point, but that ensures that everybody on a construction project is associated with a labor, or at least even if they're not with a labor union, they're also receiving those same benefits, the pay and the healthcare and the safe working conditions that any other union worker would get. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I think that helps us understand how some of this will roll out for co-ops as well as the investor-owned utilities. So I appreciate that. And Dean, to add on to that question you had on churches and schools, Sean did drop a link in the chat about Northwestern's E+ renewable energy program, which I know a lot of people on this call probably already know about, but it is worth elevating as another tool in the toolkit. Any other questions? That's all of the questions that we had in the chat directly, but as we're talking and on Kate, I know Kate had those discussion questions at the end of her presentation. Are there additional questions for Kate or questions for the group that we should talk through? We probably have time for one or two more questions if there are.
Kate, I don't think I saw IBEW on the list of partners in the alliance. It seems like they would be really important to have in there, and I was interested that you made a presentation to them. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of sped through how BGA is created. Maybe I'll go back to that slide here. Sorry, it's a little jarring. Yeah, so the IBEW does not sit on our national board. They're not a national member of ours. We do have the utility workers who have been part of BGA for a long, long time. But the IBEW, I believe they're on every one. They sit on every one of our state tables in the West. So that's Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and Colorado. And so I work with the IBEW a lot through those tables because I work all over the West, or the inner Mountain West. And yeah, we don't actually have a table in Montana. So this has been a little bit, I've been in this position for a year and a half. And there's a question about whether or not we create a table here, or we work with partners in a collaborative manner, and potentially collaborate at regional working group levels in order to advance a lot of these priorities. So I'm doing a lot of presentations and a lot of introducing of myself to organizations like this, to like Montana Wildlife Federation, Montana Conservation Voters. I work a lot with the Montana AFL-CIO. So I would say it's more, it's not an intentional like exclusion of the IBEW. I think that it's just, they do participate at the state levels. And I think it'd be great if they joined at the national level. And we do work with a lot of unions that do not sit at our table, but we definitely consult with them when it comes to federal policy that would really impact them. So that's a little bit of our working philosophy as we go, especially when it comes to things like the EV charging infrastructure. That's part of the bill funding. the IBEW had a really big interest in making sure that all those workers received the EVITP certification or training program certification that really ensures that you don't have just anyone, you know, installing these, because it does cause fires, you know, in people's homes or in public, you know, charging stations. So that was a huge priority of theirs, and something that we actually did incorporate into our platform. So yeah, it's something that I hope that we work a lot with them on. I don't think we could do any more work on transmission if we didn't have IBEW at the table also informing us about their work. I've also worked with the IBEW a lot with the coal cleanup project that McKenna was referencing, the local 1638 quite a bit. And then in Colorado, we work a lot with 111 and IBEW 68. 111 represents the workforce in many coal communities. So Hayden, Craig, and Pueblo. So yeah, so through that we're pretty connected, but yeah, it's not official. But I mean, great flag though. So yeah, I had some questions for you guys. As you guys saw in the presentation, a lot of these tax credits are going to be going out to developers, to entities that want to be like, you know, putting up pretty big, sizable developments or systems on their homes or on their churches or in our local governments, on our MUSH buildings. And I'm just wondering if anybody here is like already planning to utilize any of these IRA funds. I don't know if it's like something people want to like chime in about or just say it in the chat. But it's a question that I've had. Are people even planning on utilizing this?
I think informally, and I'd like to hear what other folks are thinking about who are on the call, but I have certainly heard from or heard about developers who are interested in pursuing, and I think that's changed the financial picture for renewable energy deployment on a utility scale and power purchase agreements and that avenue of renewables in Montana. But the majority of the interest from the membership and thinking about how to communicate, if you're an installer primarily for residential or local businesses, how you can communicate to the end user about some of the incentives there. So that's a good cue up for the December Exploring Energy Series talk. We'll be talking because the IRA and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, I mean, these are huge pieces of legislation. And like Kate said, they're game changers and there's so much embedded within them that you could take so many different trailhead directions. So in December, we'll be talking about the household incentives as a primary focus, some of the rebates and tax incentives. But that's where I've been hearing a lot of buzz from the MREA perspective. I'm not sure how others feel.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. From Kylie from Onsite Energy. Yeah, do you mind sharing a little bit about you said you're starting to specify American-made solar panels for your commercial projects. Can you talk a little bit about that, like that process?
Yeah. So basically, ever since the IRA passed, just stuff coming down the line, I believe Helene is what we've started to specify. But yeah, just the idea of it's just that extra amount that'll kind of get larger commercials over that kind of like payback period that they need for the investment. So.
And has it been hard to source, or like what's your experience been?
It's so far, I think the best. We've been going with the Helene's because I believe they're manufactured somewhere in the Midwest. But yeah, it's been a little bit difficult. I know Hanwha Q-Cells, some of their like 400 watt panels are produced in Georgia, but we do see a couple of the manufacturers who have traditionally manufactured overseas planning on building manufacturing plants in the US just to kind of like take advantage of these incentives. So that's awesome. And hopefully the next 5 years, we'll be seeing a lot more panels made in the US that we can specify.
Well, I'm also wondering, I don't know how many other developers we have on the call, but one thing that's been brought up is the clean energy queue and not being able to get projects permitted and added to the grid. And I'm just wondering if anybody is experiencing that now, or if that's a concern. Might be, I don't know if this is the right crowd to ask, but I'm just wondering how that's playing out in Montana.
Yeah, I think that and Kate was referencing that the interconnection queue. I think you said clean energy queue, but we got what you meant. And that may be a topic for another Exploring Energy series, because that's a doozy. that is a big one, and it has a lot of dynamics to it and lots of different stakeholders and agency players involved. But good thoughts, everyone. Okay, well, before we wrap up here, thank you. And if you do have any other additional questions for Kate, oops, am I showing you the right screen here? I want to show you the presentation mode. Haha. Kate did drop her information on one of the slides. We'll share those slides at the end of this presentation as well, because Kate had some helpful links for some of the IRA and Bipartisan Infrastructure Law guidebooks. But just to give you a preview of where the Exploring Energy series is headed, this December, we'll be talking about how the Inflation Reduction Act impacts your home. We've got Cora Wyant from Rewiring America, who will be presenting on some of the household rebates and how those will apply based on income levels. She's a great presenter. She's just a wealth of knowledge. And so through this pairing, we can talk about labor, some of the more like large scale incentives that are through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and IRA, and then also bring it all the way down to households. So we're really excited about that. And if you're somebody who likes looking forward in your calendar, January 4th, we're hosting the Trailhead of the Montana Legislature will be the topic for the Exploring Energy series, January 2023, coming up fast. But again, thank you everyone for attending this presentation, and we'll have the recording on the MREA YouTube channel as well as on our website. But we appreciate everyone's time. We hope that this was a useful and helpful discussion. All of our gratitude goes to Kate for being our guest presenter today. You certainly broadened our scope and taught us a whole lot of things. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it. And I'll get those slides out to everybody as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.